see us. Okay. Well, good morning. Thanks for being here. So I am going to talk a little bit about how we can collectively increase our impact on climate literacy. As you know, there's been lots of efforts across the country over the years. Different communities, groups, projects have been involved in these kinds of activities. And this was augmented by federal funding, the bulk of which occurred between 2008 and 2013 with funding from NSF, NASA, and NOAA. Some of it's ongoing, but there's not very much new funding here. And so a lot of the projects that were funded under these efforts are now ending, and so those efforts aren't going to be sustained. And trying to determine ways in which these different groups can extend their impact and both in the time that they can be active and also in communicating and leveraging each other's expertise and resources is important. So a large-scale coordination and leveraging of effective climate change education effort needs to increase collective impact on climate literacy. And this is needed for teachers and students as well as all decision makers in all contexts that people need to make decisions that address the implications of climate change. So to address this need, there's been an evolving conversation within the climate education community on how to more effectively organize and coordinate these efforts using the collective impact framework. And these began in 2012, but before we get into what that conversation, the outcomes of that conversation, just for everybody, I wanted to lay the framework of what is this collective impact framework. I won't go into the details of it, but there are 5 conditions for increasing collective impact. These include a shared common agenda, a shared vision of change, a shared system of measurements for measuring progress, mutually reinforcing activities that contribute to those shared measures of progress, continuous communication that's consistent and ongoing that builds trust, and a backbone support organization that can help coordinate all of these efforts. The conversation, as I said, began in 2012. This is the list of meetings that we held these conversations and gathered input. It began with the Climate and Energy Literacy Summit hosted by the National Center for Science Education in December 2012, followed by the climate change, the Tri-Agency Climate Change Education PI meeting. There was a session on creating a climate change collaboratory, and then preparing for global change, collaboration and community engagement that enables a scientific savvy society. That occurred here at AGU last year. There was a Clean Network teleconference on the topic, and then the Building Climate Solutions Conference, the particular session, Building Climate Change Education and Communication Collective, which many of you participated in, and then the National Climate Assessment Engagement Workshop last February. 65 individuals participated in all of these conversations, and the focus of those conversations was what kinds of activities could a backbone support organization provide that would help you extend and leverage your work and share and maintain it. The notes from all of these discussions were organized from the 6 meetings into a Google Doc that all the participants could comment on, and then I went through and integrated all of those comments. And there is now a 14-page Google Doc that summarizes, well, that's the accumulation of all of those comments. I then summarized that into a 4-page document giving the highlights, and what I'm going to do now is give you an overview of the highlights from those conversations. One of the first things that occurred when we started these conversations is that in order to frame the conversation, the participants in the first AGU workshop a year ago decided they needed to draft a vision statement. And so this was built on the articulated vision statements from the Climate Energy Literacy Summit and on the 100K in 10 initiative. And this is the vision statement that was drafted in December of 2013, which was enabling society and future generations to understand, address, and solve pressing local to global challenges presented by climate and global change. Now, We did get so many comments on this in terms of wordsmithing it, that there are more comments than there are letters in this. And so instead of trying to address all of them, with people not in the same room to negotiate, I've just left this, and you can go into the Google Doc and look at all of the individual comments. So this isn't by any means a final version, but what I can say is that in general, the climate literacy efforts share a broad common agenda and vision for increasing society's understanding of and ability to respond to changes and opportunities presented by climate change. None of the conversations really wanted to change the general gist of that vision statement, just the nuances of how it was worded and framed. Also, what came out of this was a general understanding that each of the participants in groups that they represented had their own audiences and stakeholders, metrics of success, communication, educational strategies and activities. Some of the partners interact through a network, an existing networks of networks, so that there's quite a broad reach. From those 65 people, it would be interesting to try to determine actually how many people they actually reach. But there's a lack of a strong, sufficiently funded backbone support organization has hampered individual organizations and networks' abilities to maximize their efforts more fully and cooperate and collaborate with each other. So what emerged from this conversation was the need for a network of networks with an overarching backbone network that would enable member networks to share materials, expertise, and leverage their efforts more broadly. The overarching backbone network and each member network needs to reflect the characteristics and qualities of effective collective impact. And the role of the overarching backbone network could be to help each member network effectively address the characteristics of the collective impact framework. So the overarching backbone network, this is sort of the conditions for having an effective overarching backbone network, is member networks see the need and see the advantages of having and trust in the processes and personnel of the overarching backbone network. The member networks need to agree to actually be coordinated, and the overarching backbone network must not compete for funding with the member networks. The backbone network, the overarching backbone network definitely needs funding, but those need to be different avenues. Because as I see it, the overarching backbone network should help the member networks actually find and secure funding. The characteristics of an overarching backbone network, so this gets into the nitty-gritty of what people should need. It should have an overarching common agenda that includes a tiered process that can scale to concrete goals and common agendas of the member networks. The leadership needs to be supportive and involved with the member networks. And there needs to be effective and appropriate communication and technology tools that provide the necessary support for the member networks. And the staff needs staff and adequate funding to enable the overarching network to offer a large enough variety of services to meet the needs of the wide variety of member networks. So what are the activities that this group of 65 people sort of, as it came together, they needs to provide across the member networks, it needs to provide coordination to broker information, services, resources, and information, facilitate communication, develop partnerships with external groups for needed expertise that's not already represented, and then to create unifying messaging that the member networks can use. It also needs to provide more directly to the member networks support for the member network's common agenda and shared measures, whether that's in the development of that common agenda or support for helping them achieve it, and help identify funding, as I mentioned before, and support extending audiences and outreach for those member networks. So what I want to do now is give you examples of how this kind of coordination can actually extend efforts. The CLEAN network, which many of you know about and part of, is not a funded effort. It's a grassroots effort. It was formed in 2008 when the Climate Literacy Essential Principles were first published because of the pressing need to get them implemented. There is an active listserv that now has 467 members that has discussions and announcements, weekly teleconferences with presentations that are all posted, and a Facebook page. So this is to give you a sense of how active the Clean Network is. This is the number of participants in the weekly teleconferences starting from August 2010 when we first started tracking it through last Tuesday. We have presentations about half the time through the academic year, so we've had 88 presentations in 223 sessions with an average participation of 12. And what if I have this, here we go. This peak here, just keep this in mind because I'll come back to that because this was pretty recent. So occasionally we engage a larger community. Sometimes when the topics are of interest to the wider community, I send the announcement of the discussion to the Tri-Agency listserv, the NASA ESTEAM listserv, and a variety of other interested groups. This is the traffic on the listserv itself, tracked since September of 2009. So I want to give you a few examples of how we've been able to quickly address different issues. First, there's a national climate assessment was released last May, and the Clean Network hosted the monthly discussions of the NCA Education Affinity Group leading up to the release. And then afterwards, we contributed significantly to the development of the NCA learning pathways that are now posted on the climate.gov portal. And this is just a screenshot of it. It is a little movie, but that shows you. But it really provides direct suggestions for addressing the key messages by region and providing resources, links to resources from the Clean collection to address these, plus other background materials. Another recent one was that peak in the teleconference graph. The White House OSTP announced a call to action for climate education and literacy. That was released on October 22nd of this year. The Clean Network's October 28th call was focused on that call to action. We had 37 participants. Laura Peets from the White House OSTP participated to really clarify for the people who called in what was wanted. This resulted in 42 submissions from the Clean Network on November 27th. And on December 3rd, the White House OSTP released a fact sheet, and 9 of which is of the 25 that were efforts that were listed were from the Clean Network. Another area of coordination is these climate literacy sessions at AGU. We've been doing this since 2011. You can see the number of papers and the number of conveners involved. So this is really a very wide effort with contributions from the broader community. It has resulted in now 114 sessions. You can see the decrease from last year as the funding began to end. There's a decrease in papers, but the interest, the same number of conveners, and we have 8 oral sessions and 5 poster sessions. And I'll point out that in 2013, we had the first Education Union session. And we had another one this year. Other meetings where we've coordinated efforts is the GSA meeting and the North American Association for Environmental Education. So this is just to summarize the Clean collective impact. The collective impact is needed in order to extend our efforts. Evidence suggests that the collective impact model would be an effective one to move forward with that. Discussions between 2012 and 2014 focused on identifying the characteristics of an overarching backbone network, and the conversation is now evolving to developing a common agenda. And the AGU workshop we're having Thursday morning, I invite all of you to participate in that conversation to move it forward. And we'll have a follow-up conversation in January at the NCA National Council for Science and the Environment's Energy and Climate Change Conference. Thank you.
Thank you.